You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, and even a little bit of news and gossip. With Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today, we're talking to author, historian, and TV personality, Eddie Muller. And now, here's Steve.
Welcome to our show, Eddie.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, guys.
We are in the presence of film history royalty here. I mean, you are such a force of nature. I hope you live forever because film noir is not going to be looking very good after you're gone, I'll tell you.
Thank you for that big buildup. I don't know how much of that I actually believe, but I appreciate it very much.
We're heavily touting your new edition of Dark City, the book. And if those listeners and viewers who are actually listening to our show, you got to run and pick up Dark City Dames. I mean, if you love film noir, and of course, Eddie is the czar of noir, this is your book. And I have to tell you, I think you get inside these women in a way that is just so special. I really enjoyed, because I didn't know much about this. You pick some actresses that the average person on the street doesn't know too much about. We all know that there have been women over the years in these dark noir films, detective stories, mystery stories, crime stories. But these women never reached the status of an Elizabeth Taylor or a Bette Davis. But these women were the core of film noir, so many of them, and we'll talk about them today. But thank you for doing this book.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much for the kind words. And yes, the way you described them, that's exactly the point of the book, because I felt that they were emblematic of film noir in the sense that noir itself is kind of a marginalized genre in Hollywood. These weren't the A-list pictures. You know, they're not going to be nominated for Oscars by and large. And so I really wanted to write a book about performers who made their living making those kind of films, not exclusively B films. I don't want to say that, because I can tell you a funny story about when somebody said that to Evelyn Keyes. And she had a very terse response to somebody claiming she made B films. But you hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly why I chose if I can say, I cast the book the way I did, because I wanted to give people some insight into what that type of career is. You're grabbing for the brass ring, but you don't quite get it.
There's something that's always been very sexy about film noir. And these women, whoever they may be, and I'm aware of who they are, they all have sex appeal.
Yeah, that is absolutely true.
Well, but it's just a common thing through all the women I'm seeing that they're in your book.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting to note that they don't lose it. I mean, I would say that some of these gals had sex appeal, when I knew them in their 70s and even getting into their 80s. It's not something that a movie star just loses. Sophia
Loren said, you're born with it and you die with it.
Well, in her case, that is absolutely the truth.
You know, it's interesting. I've become a big Ruth Roman fan. And I know her ex-husband. I discovered Ruth Roman years later, after she had been a staple in your film noir world. She did a little film with Paul Anka, which you may know, called Look in Any Window.
Yes.
Which was run on the Channel 9 movie in LA back in the 60s. They had this thing where they would run the same movie 5 nights in a row. And when they ran it the first night, there was such an outcry that it didn't run the next 4 nights. but it's basically Paul Anka plays a peeping Tom, but
Right.
this is 1961, and I'll tell you, Ruth Roman looked as hot as she's ever looked. I did find it interesting, though. You made a point in your book of saying that she was miscast in Strangers on a Train because she was not that kind of buttoned up patrician Washington woman. She was really more of would it be a broad? Would you say that?
She was hot.
Well,
She was hot.
I'm basically saying that because that's kind of what Alfred Hitchcock felt. He felt the studio forced her on him for that film. And obviously, if you know Hitchcock's films, he would have preferred casting Grace Kelly in everything. So I think he was like looking for more of a Grace Kelly type than a Ruth Roman type. I don't know if I'd call her a broad, but she definitely had a much earthier appeal than someone like a Grace Kelly or Ruth Roman would not be my first choice as a society debutante or something,
One of the major enjoyment parts of the book for me, in acting, we always talk to actors about the arc, how important the arc is, how they start and how they end up in that film or play that they're doing. And you do that in the book. And I find it fascinating. You start out letting us know their background, et cetera, and then how they end up. And I found it, I'm sure people read the book in different ways. I had to go part A and part B. I couldn't continue part A. I had to see how that person ended up. And we mentioned Ruth Roman. You make it perfectly plain of all these women. I think she sounds like the most driven of all of them. She really wanted a career, and she was not going to let anything stop her.
Absolutely.
But the other thing I liked about the book was you give us a lot of film titles to stew on, which I'd never heard of. And one of the Ruth Roman titles I definitely want to find is The Window, because it sounds like the opposite of the character she's played in Strangers on a Train.
Oh my gosh, The Window is fantastic. Yes, Steve, that's your homework assignment. You have to go out today.
Was that Bobby Driscoll, The Window?
Yes, that's the one with
Scary
Bobby
movie.
Yeah.
Scary movie. By the
Fantastic.
way, Milton Berle told me some great stories about Ruth Roman. He had a thing for Ruth Roman, did a movie with her. 1948, thereabout. Terrible movie. But she was his co-star.
Now,
there are so many jokes I could go for right now.
Right.
But I think I'll just let them lie there.
Eddie,
I don't know what rating this show is, so
Eddie, you've been doing this for so long. You do film noir festivals for 26 years and still going on, which is great. What did you learn? Did you learn anything new from doing this book? Were there new things that came into your purview that you hadn't known before, or was pretty much what you knew?
Well, Julian, what you have to remember is, although the book has come out in this new edition, 25 years after I wrote it. So what I know today and what I'm able to impart to people on TCM and all that kind of stuff is largely because of what I learned writing this book. But not just in terms of the movies themselves, but to me, what I learned doing this book, it was more important to me as a person than as a movie expert or anything, because being able to share so much time and the life stories of these women with them, it really made me a different person. I can say that with absolute certainty. They were so gracious and open. And like I say at one point in the afterword, I say, this book really taught me to listen, because look, all you guys are in the media, and you know that when you're a reporter or a journalist or something, especially if you do that work on a deadline, you go into every encounter with a bit of an agenda. Like, I got to get something out of this because I'm on deadline. I want something to be good and punchy and all. And I didn't have that with writing this book. I just they allowed me to spend as much time as I wanted to spend and talk with them and listen to them to a degree that was very unusual for me. Usually if I did an interview, it was a one-day thing, but these relationships actually went on for months, and I really got to know them. And some of the stuff that they imparted to me, didn't come until like the 2 or 3 months into knowing them, when I earned their trust and they said, okay, I'm going to actually tell the guy this story, and so that's what I learned. Honestly, I don't know how any other way to express it than to just say I became a much better listener having done this book.
Could you tell us, Eddie, something about Claire Trevor?
She was tired. Sorry to say that, but I never actually met her face to face. We just spoke on the phone. And although she did agree to sit for a photo session for the original magazine article that this book ended up being drawn from, she said, honey, I don't have the energy anymore. But she was, I'm glad that I got to profile her in the new edition, because since she wouldn't sit for that lengthy an interview, and it was the same thing with Rhonda Fleming. She didn't want to do a long extended interview about her personal life, which kind of left her out of the running as a candidate for the original book. But then I did get to know her afterwards. Like Claire, I didn't really know that well. But I'm so happy to be able to write about her, because she's as important as a film noir woman as anybody.
She was great on screen. She was absolutely great.
Yeah, and she was the original tough cookie all the way back to the late 30s, when she was in Dead End and Stagecoach and stuff like that. The whore with the heart of gold, but then she just became this fixture in film noir, and she could pretty much do anything. And she married extremely well. She married a fellow named Milton Bren, who basically was one of the builders of Orange County in Southern California. And so she and Rhonda Fleming, I joke, they ended up with all the money. The two of them ended up with all the money.
Do you know Ted? Do you know Ted Mann?
I did not know Ted, but Rhonda was so sweet, and she, there's a funny story I tell in the book about how when I inquired as to whether she would participate, we had a phone call, and she asked me straight away. She said, "How many times have I been married?" And I said 4, and she said, "Oh, wrong answer. Sorry, this isn't going to work." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she says, "I've been married twice. I was married to Ted Mann, and I'm married to my current husband, Daryl." And she said, "Nobody needs to know anything about those other ones." And of course, I was wrong. She'd been married 6 times, not 4 times.
She was on TCM yesterday. She was in the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. And, they say that color in movies was invented for Rhonda Fleming. And having watched Connecticut Yankee, I believe that she defines a redhead. Absolutely.
Steve, she loved singing. And her bonus being married to Ted Mann was she got to sing the national anthem at all the black tie industry affairs.
Yeah,
Rhonda singing him, God bless America. So
I think, Arthur, we both knew Ted pretty well, and
I knew Ted pretty good.
He was a wonderful guy and a terrific. He and now along with her, they really gave an enormous amount of money to charities. They were very, very involved in doing good things. He had made his money. I think, what was it, Arthur, in Minneapolis, I think, in theaters, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Minneapolis and then into Los Angeles. Eddie, if I may, a high school student comes up to you and says, "Mr. Muller, could you please define to me film noir?"
The shortest I've gotten it down to is 3 words: suffering with style. Suffering with style. It doesn't really explain anything, but it's 3 words, so it's as short as I can possibly.
There's a look and a feel to it. There is a look and a feel to it, though.
When Eddie and I spoke a couple of years ago, I was interested when you talked. I asked you the same question in our interview, thinking that noir really burgeoned after World War II. But you made a point of saying that you have to go back to the beginnings, going all the way back to the stock market crash in 29 and how that impacted on film, and also the arrival of all these emigres from Europe, these directors who brought with them what you said, the suffering part of it.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important to realize that so many of the books that I read when I was growing up and I was developing my interest in film fixated on the visual aspect of cinema. And it was all about the directors. Nobody really wrote about the writers, but I can guarantee you that the longevity of film noir is based on this wonderful union between a very distinctive visual style and a very, very distinctive writing style that manifests itself in the language and the wit and just the hard-boiled nature of these films that give them, I'm going to just say the wit that is so attractive to people. So when you watch a movie like Double Indemnity, you have to realize that not only are you seeing this beautifully constructed visual artifice, you're getting this language that people just absolutely love. You know, the wisecracks and the one-liners and the world-weary voiceovers, that's all language. And so to me, it was this wonderful combination of this darker European sensibility, like you're saying, Steve, that that's where the world wars were fought, on European soil. And so they had a much darker view of humanity, but America provided the piss and vinegar and the language that people love so much. You know, there's a very American style of vernacular speech that is every bit as cherished by audiences as the visual allure of the movies. So
do you have a personal favorite, Eddie? A personal favorite film noir film?
Yeah, I do. And I'm sometimes hesitant to say this because it doesn't necessarily mean that it's emblematic of the genre or anything. My favorite film is In a Lonely Place, is Nicholas Ray's movie In a Lonely Place with Humphrey Bogart and Gloria Graham. And it's my favorite film for a number of reasons. I like it thematically. I like the fact that it's about a writer. I can definitely relate to it. But if somebody were to ask me what's the emblematic film noir, I'm going to say either Double Indemnity or Out of the Past. I mean, those are the two films that pretty much crystallize it all. So to go back to that high school student you were talking about, if they came up to me and said, what do I need to watch to understand what film noir is? It's going to be one of those two movies.
Sure. Double Indemnity is one of the greatest films ever made. Period.
I agree.
In reading your biographies of these amazing women, they all struggled. There was no easy road for any of them. Not only did they have trouble getting the right contract or the right part, but they would often lose the part to somebody else who was maybe a bigger name or had better connections. It's kind of, I often think that Hollywood, which no longer benefits from the contract system, which basically made Hollywood a factory creating stars, and that whole process, I always thought that was a good thing. But your portrait of these contract players is not a good one. They constantly fought, and if they did get the contract, a lot of these women didn't even get the contract.
Right. I mean, it's interesting you say that, because the only one where I would disagree a little bit is Evelyn Keyes, because Evelyn kind of just walked into Hollywood and it fell at her feet. She was immediately under contract to Cecil B. DeMille. She's making movies, co-starring with Frederick March on The Buccaneer, like right out of the bat. Then she's Scarlett O'Hara's younger sister. But the point you bring up that's so interesting is that she later felt like it was all too easy. It was too easy for her. And so she had a different dilemma in that she started to just not think about her career because everything was kind of done for her. And I remember there was a there was a really poignant moment where we were sitting in her apartment talking about all this stuff, and she just kind of got really quiet, and then she looked at me very seriously and said, "Did I make a mistake? Should I have cared about my career more?" And she said, you just want to talk about the film noir stuff. I get that. And everybody else just wants to talk about Gone with the Wind. But I did all these other movies under contract at Columbia that nobody watches.
But what about the Jolson story? Are you kidding? My God.
Yeah. Well,
my favorite Evelyn Keyes movie is not a noir movie by any means. It's 1945's 1001 Nights, where she plays a genie in a bottle named Babs. And it's a great role opposite Phil Silvers and Cornell Wilde. But it's funny because I always remember her also playing Tom Yule's wife in The 7-Year Itch.
Well, Evelyn would say, you want to talk about career suicide. You just appear, when you're over 40, you appear in a movie opposite Marilyn Monroe. She said, that's like the worst career decision I could have possibly made.
She was in a film that I did called Going Hollywood, the War Years, and I spent time with her. And what I was really impressed with was the fact that she really understood the business at that point. Having been married to John Huston and Artie Shaw, I mean, she married some of the most powerful and interesting men around. But she said an interesting thing that I never forgot. She said, we bitched and moaned about the studio system, and we do anything to have it back now.
Yeah. Yep, that's absolutely right. And that was kind of a common denominator between all these women, to be honest with you. They all said, they felt very sympathetic towards actresses today. And bear in mind that when I say today, I'm talking about 2000 when I wrote this book. It's very different. It's 25 years later now, right? But the idea that you're completely on your own now. But back then, they were like, if you got ushered into the system, they did so much for you with the training, teaching you how to sing, teaching you how to dance, teaching you how to do whatever needed to be done. You felt like you had been handed the keys to the kingdom, in a sense, even though the rug could be pulled out from under you when your expiration date arrives.
I mean, just look at character actors. Each of these studios had dozens of faces that just you don't have those kinds of actors anymore. If they get into movies, it's almost by accident. And then, of course, the grooming. Let's talk a little bit about Marie Windsor. I knew nothing about Marie Windsor. You were giving me a total education. I certainly knew who she was. I think the first time I ever saw Marie Windsor was probably coming home from school, watching her in Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy, which is hardly a noir, but I mean, she's in obviously a major film noir, which is Kubrick's The Killing. And she plays, of all things, she's married to Elijah Cook Jr., which seems like the oddest couple ever conceived of in Hollywood. And
the greatest noir marriage of all time. That's what it is. It's like two noir archetypes married.
Right.
He was
delivering Jim Thompson dialogue.
But if women are looking for women liberation, they should watch how she handles her husband in that movie.
Now he was pathetic. He was so pathetic.
She makes a movie called The Narrow Margin, which was later remade for Gene Hackman decades later. But you were talking about the fact that it was such a great introduction for her, and yet the movie wasn't even released or was postponed. What a horror story that must have been.
She was, I think she was, I shouldn't really say this, but Marie's story might be, at least I think it's the best written one in the book. And part of that credit goes to Marie herself because she was such a good storyteller. It's very interesting when as a writer, you're very, very fortunate when you get a subject that has been sitting on stories for a long time and waiting for somebody to show up who wants to hear them.
Oh yeah.
and Marie was that person. She was like, I'm I now get to tell my story. And it was very well thought out.
What was her life like later in life, Eddie?
Horrible, just horrible. I mean, my heart just went out to her because she had so many medical problems. And when she was suffering through so many things, her husband, who she adored, got even sicker than she did. Oh. And so she was his caretaker, even though she was in a wheelchair. And it was funny. I'd go to their house. I say this in the book, but I'd go visit Marie at her house, and poor Jack is literally in the other room, virtually in an iron lung. Sure. And Marie is in her motorized wheelchair with her dog Tizzy, like doing everything. And she's like crashing into everything in the house. Every single piece of furniture in that house was splintered and dented because she would collide into it because she was moving too fast, And she had her entire career was documented. She had one room that was just endless files and binders of photographs and production files. She was so proud of her career, but so concerned that it was ending and nobody was going to care. And so, boy, am I glad I showed up when I did.
And when you left that interview, I bet you felt really, really like you had accomplished something major.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I was very surprised, like with, Marie, I mentioned that all these women ended up telling me stuff that they never really told anybody else. And in Marie's case, it was how hard she tried to get pregnant. Like just the struggles that she went through with Jack, her husband, to get pregnant. And then eventually she did. And she had a very tumultuous relationship with that son, who did not turn out the way she had hoped when she tried so hard. But it was just, she was a very, very, well, I think I call her indomitable in the story because just nothing could stop her. I mean, even after all of her problems and her surgeries and her eye surgery and all this stuff, she was still like, I'm available. I'm available for work if somebody wants to cast me.
Well, Steve mentioned the idea of narrow margin being held up, but one of the things I remember reading was the fact that Howard Hughes, who was running RKO, had this vision of Robert Mitchum and Jane Russell doing the movie, which of course never happened, And
correct. They're doing the movie after it was already made.
Right.
He said as a prize.
I mean, talk about a guy who was a bull in a china shop. Howard Hughes should have never run a studio, because he sounds, from your writing and many others, is that he had his own personal agenda and it had nothing to do with creating good product.
It was called Stupping. That's what it was called.
Well,
that was his agenda.
But Arthur, I wonder about that. I honestly wonder about that because the depictions I heard from people, I mean, he was so eccentric and so pathologically shy in some ways that I kind of wonder if he was interested in the act or interested in the power that he wielded over these women, over everybody really, but specifically over these women.
Could be said for others too, though.
Yeah, but I mean, it was interesting. I mean, there was no question in my mind with Jane Greer that they had a thing. That was a physical thing that existed there. But with some of the other women, she's not in the book, but I remember Janet Leigh just telling me that, Howard Hughes was completely obsessed with her, but not like anything ever happened.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Well, it's part of this thing. Eddie, I got to mention, years ago in Boston, I dated a girl who was the spitting image of Gail Russell. I remember who Gail Russell was from film. What happened to Gail Russell? What happened with her?
She never should have been in the movie business. That what happened to her was that her mother talked her into answering a talent scout's query when she was in high school. And I honestly think that Gail Russell would have had a happy life if she had not gone to that interview. She just should never have been in front of a movie camera. As beautiful as she was, she wanted to be an artist and an illustrator and not perform for people. It was not in her nature. And then she had such terrible stage fright that the stories vary on who's responsible, not that it really matters, for giving her her first drink on a set. And that's kind of set the tidal wave in motion that eventually did her in.
What was the film she did with John Wayne?
Angel and the Bad Man.
Yes.
I think there's more than that. I think she did Blood Alley with John Wayne as well. They were actually very good friends. He was very good to her, even though John Wayne's wife thought there was a thing between them that led to the divorce, Wayne's divorce.
Yeah.
I don't actually believe that was the case. I think he was much more platonic in his relationship.
I think the Duke was also a big fan of Claire Travers because I think they worked together on Stagecoach, and then he brought her into a movie I remember her so well on, The High and the Mighty. She's one of those plane passengers. Let's talk a little bit about Colleen Gray. I find it interesting that Colleen Gray grows up. She's obsessed with Tyrone Power. She loves him on the big screen. He's part of her whole fascination. And then she's cast in Nightmare Alley. What a thrill for her. And she had she's also in The Killing, as you point out, and of course Kiss of Death. Tell us a little bit how you feel about Colleen.
The thing that was interesting about Colleen is, much like Evelyn, she didn't struggle. She was very naive. She's a very naive young woman, and she just thought that she could achieve anything she set her mind to. She had no doubts about that, but she was horribly insecure as well. And so it was amazing that she started out, at Fox, getting a contract there and making Red River on loan for Howard Hawks, and Kiss of Death and Nightmare Alley and Riding High with Bing Crosby, all of these major films right out of the gate. But she never lost this horrible insecurity that, she had imposter syndrome. That's what they call it now, right? And when I knew her, she still had this. She would still, we would do a film screening together and she would call me and say, I'm worried. I don't know what to wear. I can't figure out what to wear and I don't want to embarrass myself and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, Colleen, no. Do you see what people wear in Hollywood today?
It's funny, Eddie. It's amazing. These actors make movies where they memorize 40 pages of dialogue, but you put them on a talk show and they freeze up. Their biggest part that they can't handle is being themselves.
Well, that is certainly true of some of them. That was not Evelyn Keyes' problem. I guarantee you that.
This isn't one of your Dark City Dames, but I once had to get Armand Assante to do a Good Morning America segment, and he was terrified. This is Armand Assante, who's a fairly macho guy. He plays all these hard-edged guys. I finally convinced him to do it, and 10 minutes later, he called me back. I'm not doing it. Goodbye.
Yeah. Well, don't you think that's one of the reasons that some people become actors?
Yes. I think that's one of the biggest reasons.
Yes.
I want to talk about the book because you did 10 new interviews. You have this wonderful section called Eternal Flames. And in it, you talk to some of the people that you never got to talk to before. Was there anyone, Eddie, that you could not get? I'm assuming, just because she lived to her 90s, that you had trouble about Elizabeth Scott, because I have to say, of all my favorites, she was right up there. She really had it, I thought. And,
yes. I was very disappointed that Elizabeth Scott is not part of this project. There's a long, complicated story behind that.
Well,
then I wonder if I
would I be prompting the witness if I said, "Is it confidential?"
Yes, kind of. I'm just going to say there was a fellow who was the gatekeeper to all the old Hollywood people, and he determined that Liz Scott and I were never to meet face to face.
Marvin Page? Huh? Pretty good.
Not too bad, Arthur.
Yeah.
Not too bad. And Marvin and I had an interesting relationship. So, which started out kind of rough.
My wife and I were very close with Sandra Dee.
Yeah,
And
okay.
Marvin was always around. By the way, on the studio system, she was the last contract player at Universal, and she told her life was the studio. It was
Right.
She loved it. It was everything. Get up in the morning, you go to this world, and
the studios aren't even the studios anymore. It's almost, you wonder what's going on there. As long as they're making Iron Man 5, they're in business. But I think that you point out, Eddie, that these actresses miss the studio system, even though it could be a very difficult situation. But yeah, like you say, these young actors today,
And and Steve, not to cut you up, but I also wrote Tab Hunter's autobiography, and that's the whole saga of the studio system writ large, because there you have the whole thing where the studio is expertly camouflaging the fact that their biggest star is gay and really orchestrating his personal life to a level that these women never encountered. I mean, in Tab's case, it was such a struggle for him for the very things you're talking about. Like, I would have nothing without them, but I don't have a life with them. I can't live my life because they're controlling it.
Rock Hudson the same, no? Yeah.
Well, Tab was at Warner Brothers and Rock was at Universal, but it was essentially kind of the same story.
I'll tell you something funny. Julia mentioned Elizabeth Scott. As a kid, I thought Elizabeth Scott and Ella Raines were the same person.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, with dark hair,
Arthur.
That's interesting because with Ella Raines, there was something masculine about both of them.
Yes.
There's a masculine quality that other actresses of that era didn't have. Especially, I think, Ella Raines, who leaned into that because she was such a tomboy in real life, and a hunter and a fisher and a fisherwoman, whatever you call it, and she was an outdoorsy person, and she just in her part, she was very different. You watch her roles in film noir, she's one of the few women who wears slacks all the time.
Yeah,
it just wasn't that common at all. Not
they
saying
also both sounded like Gregory Peck.
Yeah, and they had those. Well, they were. Not Liz Scott, but she was the threat to Lauren Bacall. But they had the husky voices.
Yes.
That was a Howard Hawks thing. If you wanted to be a Hawks woman, you had to have that voice. And Colleen told me that when he was going to cast her in Red River, he said, "Your voice isn't right. Go out, take a weekend, go out in the mountains and scream until you can't make a sound. And then you'll have the voice we need."
Now today they flip one switch, they engage the AI, and you have you're immediately sounding like George Foghorn Winslow.
Yeah. It's a little alarming, isn't it, though? I mean, we don't need to detour into this, but it is alarming, the AI threat.
No, it's crazy. Hitchcock's name isn't necessarily associated with noir, although he would technically be one of those emigres, although he came quite earlier. Do you think, when you think of his filmography, prior to his arrival, or even including Rebecca, would you consider those kind of noirish?
Not necessarily. Interestingly, not necessarily the earlier stuff, the British films. I mean, the 39 Steps is sort of a precursor to action films and like Bond films almost. I mean, the 39 Steps is the original version of North by Northwest in a way, and North by Northwest is sort of the template for a James Bond movie in a sense, except that the protagonist isn't an innocent guy like in North by Northwest. He's a secret agent, but the whole feel and the rhythms of the film and all that stuff are very, very similar. But I think that it was later when Hitchcock started making more personal films that they got a little more noir. Things like Strangers on a Train and I Confess.
The Wrong Man.
The Wrong Man, definitely. And I also think that Vertigo is very much a film noir, even though it's in spectacular color.
Well, that leads to another question. Can you do noir in color?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just think that it was in black and white because most movies at that time were in black and white. But you're talking to a writer here, right? Not talking to a cameraman. So my idea of film noir is informed from the writer's perspective. And it's like what the stories are about, what the motivations of the protagonist are, more so than the visual style of the film.
Eddie, would you consider The Lost Weekend film noir?
It's a film about alcoholism that looks very much like a film noir. Oh. I mean, and I think that's entirely intentional. And I think that Billy Wilder made that film as a reaction to working on Double Indemnity with Raymond Chandler. I think that Raymond Chandler is that character in the Lost Weekend, the alcoholic writer who is kind of unable to function without the bottle.
One thing I'd like to say, and that how beautifully written the book is. It's so well done, and on top of it, you've got great photos, unbelievable window cards of the actual films themselves. But it's your writing, Eddie. It's so special. It's so unique. And when you talk about film noir being well written, you talk about your own book because that is beautifully written. I'm telling you, I just could not put the book down. And it's just I'm just saluting you happily because it's a terrific book for anyone who's interested in movies. It doesn't have to be film noir. And I'll say one other thing. The idea that this book, so far as I'm concerned, is maybe dishy, but never mean-spirited. Never. And that's what I found fascinating.
So, Julian, how do you really feel about his book?
I didn't like it that much.
I thank you, Julian. Thank you so much. That as a writer, that means everything.
And I'll put in another commercial for it. The title of the book is Dark City Dames, and it's Marie Windsor on the cover. That is Marie? Yeah, Marie Windsor's on the cover, looking very dishy. The women who defined film noir. And by the way, you share on the spine, it says TCM. Do they support the book nicely in their bookshop?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, all of these books that I've done with Running Press are all a TCM imprint book. I mean, Running Press does, the whatever you want to call it, the literary arm of Turner Classic Movies. To me, it's just been such an interesting journey, if you want to call it that, because here's a story that I haven't told before. So you guys are getting a scoop here. When I wrote the original edition of that book, I'm horrible at math, but I don't know how long TCM had been on the air when that book first came out. So it was like 2001 or something that the book came out. And TCM contacted me back then because they wanted the actresses to appear on the network on something that they called then the Summer of Darkness. It was the first time TCM had done anything based on film noir. So it was going to be a summer of film noir movies, and these actresses were going to be interviewed at a big roundtable discussion as part of the whole series. And I thought oh, my moment has come. My big break. And then TCM said, no, we don't want you. We just want the women. We want you to put us in touch with the women. And and it was so odd to me because their first choice to interview the women was Alec Baldwin. Now, Alec Baldwin, I totally get that, right? And Alec Baldwin knows his stuff. He is knowledgeable about movies, but he couldn't do it. So they got Scott Glenn to do it, right? You see where they're going with this. They wanted kind of a tough guy to interview these dames, okay? But Scott Glenn didn't know that much about the movies. So TCM ended up having to hire me to work as a consultant to Scott Glenn so that he would know what to ask the women. And this is why I loved Marie. Marie did the show, but she was so upset. And this is all based on her own career, right? Of being rejected for roles and not getting the break and everything. She transposed all of that onto me. And she was so upset that TCM wasn't putting me on camera to talk to them that every time Scott Glenn asked her a question, Marie would answer, well, as Eddie Muller says in his book, Dark City. But she would mention my name every single time she spoke so that they were forced to show my book on screen so that people would recognize it and go to the store and buy it. Just one of the reasons I love Marie.
There you go.
Eddie, I want to say something here, and that is that my wife and I DVR your program, your show, weekly to look at your presentation. You are great television. It's a very intimate feeling, very sincere, and it's great. And we don't necessarily watch the movies, but we watch Eddie Muller. And
we've got to stop complimenting him, Arthur. His head explode.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But here's my observation about that, Arthur. I appreciate it very much. It's so simple. I mean, I don't mean to keep praising me. I love it. But it's modern television, but it's a guy standing in front of a camera just talking. That's all I'm doing. Right?
It works. But the words are, people can talk and it could be drivel. And most of the time it's drivel. And your stuff.
This is what I'm saying. I mean, people make a point of coming to watch Noir Alley like it's destination TV. But the reality is every week I talk for like 8 to 10 minutes. That's it. I mean, there's nothing high tech or modern or innovative about this at all.
Well, but it feels right. It feels very comfortable watching it. It's not something you get. Thank you.
And it's not something you get very often on television anymore. Is just the simplicity of somebody just telling you a story.
Absolutely.
Without a lot of bells and whistles and all this other stuff going on. It's just, I always say, and this is interesting. I like your feedback on this. As a writer, I have participated in writers' conferences and things like this, and people say, what does it take to be a successful writer? And my answer, which is not always appreciated, is figure out a good story and go into a bar and sit down at the bar with a stranger and tell them the story. If they want to buy you a drink when you're done, you got a chance in this business. If they pick up their drink and go someplace else, you might want to think about a different line of work. Now, granted, that's a little unfair because writers work on a page, in isolation. It's not necessarily something you do in public talking, but it is that ability to engage with somebody and tell them a story that they actually want to hear that makes it work, right? So if you can do it in 5 minutes in public, that's storytelling.
Eddie, I want to interrupt and just say one thing. We got a guy here who worked for Harry Cohn. He actually knew him and worked with him, and that's Arthur. And of course, you've mentioned in the book how he was a bit of a predator on any actress. But Arthur, tell Eddie a couple of things about old Harry and you.
Oh, Eddie, I was the executive page at Columbia Pictures in New York City in 1957.
Okay.
When they moved offices to 711 Fifth Avenue. And Harry Cohn would come in infrequently, but when he would come in, the executives, Leo Jaffe, Abe Schneider, the secretary, it was like a terror. And I could never forget him. You know, there was the great movie with the hucksters when Sidney Greenstreet spits on the table and he says, you know, you remember what you just saw. Harry Cohn was his only language I ever heard was cursing. He just cursed nonstop. There were no ands or yous. It was just these dirty words, you know. And I had a whole thing that happened with him in my minor role as an executive page when I had to take William Holden, inebriated who was up there talking about Bridge on the River Kwai, and I was sent in to take him back to the Sherry Netherland Hotel, and he was drunk. So that's the story. It's in a book that's coming of my memoir. But that was incredible watching Harry Cohn in action, cursing all the time. He just
a blue streak. Eddie, we know how good you are as a nonfiction writer. Have you ever sat down to write something, a teleplay or a feature script in your arena?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've written a couple of novels, and yes, and a couple of unproduced screenplays, but yeah, I'll write in any format, anytime, anywhere.
Very good. Very, very good.
In retrospect, Eddie, now that the two books are done, what would you say was the most difficult part of putting this book together, this second one now, we love?
Well, this is going to be a total anticlimax for you here, Julian, but the hardest part of it was retrieving the original photographs that I used in the first book. That was actually, this is a good lesson to people about technology and stuff, right? I mean, when I did that book 25 years ago, all the photographs were saved on storage devices that are now totally obsolete. And so recovering those images was really difficult. And in some cases, I had the original, many original photographs loaned to me by the women themselves, and then I gave them back. And then I couldn't find or access the original scanned images. The women are gone. I've lost the photographs to wherever. And so there's a few things that didn't appear in this edition, specifically some very sexy photos from a contact sheet that Colleen Gray had provided me, because it was photographic evidence of her desire to be a femme fatale. And because they never would cast her in that role, she had a photographer come to her home and shoot rolls of pictures of her playing the part, which was a whole new thing for Colleen. And she's still adorable more than she's dangerous or anything, but she's sexy as could be. And those pictures aren't in the new edition, unfortunately, because I couldn't manage it through the change in technology.
Now you were
pictures that are there are beautiful.
Beautiful. Now you were fortunate to interview these ladies later in life. I'm curious, on the men's side, what were some of the most memorable interviews you got to on the male noir side? Because I know you've talked to some of the heroes of noir, I'm sure you have.
Well, men don't live as long as women.
Right.
Breaking news here. So I didn't get a lot of them. I mean, I've had interesting encounters. One of my favorite interviews ever was with Ricardo Montalban, who I just thought was just a wonderful man. And he granted a public interview at a film screening I did, even though he was in horrible pain. And as somebody who has suffered for 30 years with a bad back, I could identify exactly what he was going through times 10. And he still showed up and did this interview and was gracious and had a nobility about him that few people I've encountered actually possess. So I liked Ricardo Montalban. The flip side of that is the time I've spent with Lawrence Tierney, which I'm lucky I lived through. I mean, that's basically all I could say about that.
You know that he was had a guest shot on Seinfeld playing Julia Louis' father. He was fantastic. They were afraid of him. They never invited him back again.
Oh yeah, they saw him. Somebody on the show, whether it was George Costanza, or Jason Alexander, saw him stealing a steak knife off the catering table, and it was like, stay away from this guy.
Yeah, they said they were afraid of him.
I love the fact that he caused so much havoc for Quentin Tarantino when he made Reservoir Dogs that Tarantino eventually directed one episode of ER. And I think he did it so that he could cast Tierney as a beating victim who's brought into the ER. So he had his face was just smashed and blood everywhere. I think that was the way he got even with Tierney.
I thought Scott Brady was Tierney. And in fact, they turned out to be brothers.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Eddie, Gilda, film noir.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Sunset Boulevard's film noir.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally film noir.
Couldn't agree more.
It's a great Hollywood movie, but it plays with every film noir trope. You know,
well, it certainly has the cynicism, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, and it has arguably the best voiceover narration in noir. Holden is just, and you mentioned Holden earlier. It's a shame his alcoholism is such a tragedy. He was such a good actor, and I think still kind of underrated how great he was. But man, when they did the 4K restoration of Sunset Boulevard, it was magnificent how it enhanced his performance, because you can see his reactions, even in long shots, to Gloria Swanson are so brilliant in that film.
Isn't it true, Eddie, that Monty Clift was the first choice to play that role?
Yeah, that's what I understand. And I think Holden's a better choice because this sounds horrible, but he's more of a normal Joe, right? And he was
when he came up to Columbia Pictures, and I had to escort him into Harry Cohn's office at the time in New York. Best looking man I've ever seen to this day. I've never seen anybody who looked that great, and the way he walked, just fantastic. And I got
when you realize how short a period of time passed between Sunset Boulevard and his making The Wild Bunch for Sam Peckinpah, right? That's like 16 years. He looked like 50 years older.
Totally different person.
That's what alcohol took its toll. That's what alcohol will do. Well, we've come to the end of the show, Eddie. We're all blessed to have you on the show today. It's always fun to talk to you, getting under the fingernails of these wonderful women and having so much fun. I'm going to turn it over to Mike Faber, our host, our producer, and our guiding light.
Thank you, Steve. Eddie, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
This was a pleasure. I think we could have gone for like another 2 or 3 hours here.
I wouldn't doubt it. Definitely. It's fascinating. And the history behind everything you guys are talking about. It's just like, I want more. I want more. So, definitely would love to have you back sometime.
Anytime.
Awesome. But you've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you, so please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you could also find us wherever fine podcasts are found, and now you could find us up on YouTube. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? Or if you're listening to us, please give us 5 stars. If you're into social media, please check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening over on their podcast. Julian, who are you talking to this week?
This week is Juliana Margulies, who, of course, came to real fame in ER. And you're going to find out how a 32-year-old woman turns down, now listen what I'm saying, $27 million to not do another year of VR. Plus, of course, The Good Wife and The Good Life, and she's just a terrific lady, and I was very happy to do the show.
Steve, what's cooking over on Saturday night at the movies?
We talk about a important Hollywood incident that took place in October 1950 when Cecil B. DeMille and Joe Mankiewicz fought over the idea of a compulsory loyalty oath at the Screen Directors Guild, and the kind of intrigue that went around that whole story, which we've developed into a movie. And my partners on that movie, former Showtime president of programming Jerry Offsace, writer Steve Moulton, and film historian Avi Hearn and I are trying to take that to the finish line. So that's a lot of fun discussion.
Wow, that sounds pretty intense, actually. Cool. Arthur, what's coming up on our podcast next week?
We have a podcast that is going to be devoted to Broadway bombs, shows that have come to Broadway and exploded. We hear about all the hits. There's some very, very expensive ones that have bombed as well. Last thing, Eddie, I was so impressed by William Holden, the 70-year-old kid. I used to call him Mr. Homeding, Mr. Homeburn. I couldn't get his name out. He was that awesome to me in his stature, you know?
Yeah, I can understand.
Nice man.
I get teary-eyed every time I look at the little video of he and Barbara Stanwyck when she gets her Lifetime Achievement Award or something from the AFI, and Holden presents it to her, and it's such a poignant, touching moment when she calls him my golden boy, and oh my God, I get so teary every time I look at that.
That is awesome. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, and of course, Eddie, thanks for listening tonight. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber, and we will see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
What is the Flopcast? Is it just a weird podcast about cartoons, music, TV, comic books, movies, chickens, and stuff from the 70s and 80s you thought nobody but you remembered? Yes. Will it be the dumbest half hour of your week? Probably. The Flopcast. We will waste your time.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.